Arriesgado en el extranjero, yo me siento solo contra el mundo entero. Será un sueño este gran deseo, no me llevo de la gente que en mí creo. Dirán que yo soy loco por llegar sin un trabajo, pero yo me lo busco hasta debajo de la mesa. El que juzga no entiende el luchar por libertad. Yo valoro eso más que la comodidad. Juro que veré el horizonte. No le temo al miedo sin razones. Y creo en el potencial de mis determinaciones. Yo no me rendiré a los sinsabores. ¿Qué será si no me comprometo a esto y dejo que la vida me pase lento? Son aquellos que de Nueva York no aprovechan. No me desanimen, le busco la vuelta. Dirán que yo soy loco por no dejarme llevar. Me comparan con fulano y su fracaso cruel y grave. Que muestren la enciclopedia para ver las reglas de la vida, para definir si a mi manera habrá salida. Juro que veré el horizonte. No le temo al miedo sin razones. Y creo en el potencial de mis determinaciones. No me rendiré a los sinsabores.
Thanks, Pedro. So our case study tonight is a project created by Oya Group, which is a company based out of Bushwick, Brooklyn. And they serve community through arts, media, education, and social service. And artistic director and founder, Modesto Flako Jimenez, is the creator of this story, Mercedes. And this story is a tribute to his late grandmother, Mercedes, who battled from dementia towards the end of her life. Modesto was her caregiver, and it's her legacy that brings us together. I want to contextualize a little bit about this project before I introduce our incredible guests that we have with us tonight. I found out about this project back in 2020, maybe 2019, when Flako had first got an opportunity to develop this new work at Brick in Brooklyn. And Mercedes was still alive when this offer happened. And Modesto knew that he wanted to reflect on his grandmother's impact on the immigrant communities that she served after coming from the Dominican Republic. And so reached out to me as the director of the piece and said, I want to work on this new play about my grandmother. So of course, I said yes. And then the pandemic hit, turning this project from a staged play into ultimately a documentary because it had to be. We couldn't host audiences. We needed to find a way to explore this story in ways that kept us socially distanced. And so it was at that point I also realized that Flako was almost preempting his grieving process of her inevitable transition. I realized that it was really hard for him to tell this story about her, especially when she was still alive. And so I decided to take the pressure off, and I said, you know what, don't worry about it. You know, we'll do a documentary. Let's record some folks from your community, other friends, relatives for whom grew up in Bushwick as well and are facing similar experiences with their family members. And so off we went. We took a camera, we went to Mercedes's home, and we recorded. we recorded interviews with these community members, and that was how the project started. From that point, all of a sudden, we realized we had a documentary on our hands. And so we started to capture footage of Mercedes, capture footage of Flako talking about his experience as a caregiver. And that's how it started. We premiered the documentary at BRIC, and then as Flako does, he finds ways to resource the project. And it took on many forms. From that documentary, Flako and Oya Group started creating what he was calling healing rooms, where he would essentially transport Mercedes's life to a room, and it almost functioned as like an art gallery walk where you could kind of experience her life as a gallery. And the documentary was present there for us to learn more about her life. And this is when Flako started to enlist art therapists and social workers into the conversation to ensure that the communities who showed up to these spaces felt supported. This is why we have someone like Sara, who's in the room, who I'll introduce in a moment, who's also an art therapist herself and has been a part of the Mercedes project. Flako then started getting excited about virtual reality and how can we turn this healing room into a virtual reality experience for audiences, and started to develop this story as a virtual reality piece. And then, a little while after her passing, Flako was finally ready to pen the staged play that he originally thought that he was going to write in 2020. So off we began. And Flako, as the artistic director of Oya Group, and myself as the artistic director of MTF, we're like, well, let's do something together. And MTF does music, so we should make some music for this stage play. In come Pedro, who created original songs from scratch that served as the tentpole for the creation of this staged play. Just this past year in 2024 at Brooklyn Academy of Music, all of these elements, the healing rooms and the documentary and excerpts from the stage play and the VR experience and the opportunity to get support from art therapists and social workers to provide resources for communities suffering from this disease, all came together and all existed in one place for the very first time. And the reason why we're bringing this case study to us today is because Modesto has many imaginings about the ways that this work can not only exist in New York City, but can exist beyond New York City all across the country. And so the question becomes, what is the relationship between arts-based practices and the healthcare sector? What are the things that we're seeing that already exist? What are the things that we can imagine together? I'll end with one of the incarnations of Mercedes has been a music tour that tours across the 5 boroughs of New York City. And in partnership with Dementia Spring, in partnership with City Meals on Wheels, elders are provided food, provided opportunity for dance classes and live performance with Pedro and his band, offered resources from art therapists, and we're taking all of these resources straight to senior centers all across the 5 boroughs. In some ways, that is the most recent incarnation of this work that is still alive, it is still breathing, and is the inspiration for our investigations tonight. I want to introduce our guests. We have with us Dr. Marc Rothman, who we like to call Dr. Marc, who is one of the founders of Dementia Spring, which supports visual and performing artists who raise awareness about dementia and inspire creativity in people living with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Glad to have you here, Dr. Marc.
Psyched to be here. Thanks.
We've got Lis Chirinos from Sing for Hope, who's the Director of Arts and Public Health, and Sing for Hope provides creative programs which bring hope, healing, and connection to millions of people in hospitals, schools, care facilities, refugee camps, transit hubs, and community spaces worldwide. Thanks for being with us, Lis.
Honored to be here.
And last but not least, we want to welcome art therapist who has been along for the ride of Mercedes, Serrano-Esquilin, who we're really excited to hear about your personal experiences and your work in the field. Glad to have you here, Sara.
Thank you so much.
So this is a conversation where we will first learn together and hear from them before tapping in and offering your thoughts and reflections as we dive a little bit deeper. So let's start this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Marc. So you run an organization that centers the intersection of dementia and the arts. I'm curious about what value or impact you have seen in these projects who are merging art with the healthcare sector.
Thanks for having us. First of all, I am the co-founder of the Dementia Spring Foundation, along with Cece Mitt, my partner, who's with us tonight. We really established Dementia Spring because on that fateful day when the pandemic hit, all the people that we knew who were doing art with people with memory loss were like out of work instantaneously. And on the other side of the equation, all the people who have memory loss who are dependent on the activity, the social engagement, the effects on their mood, all of the things that it gave to their caregivers, they were out of luck and stuck on a screen. And it just didn't work as well as it should, although some people, pioneers, did great work, struggled through it. But it was hard. And we were like, that's where we want to be, right? We just want to sort of help bring the arts to people and their families who are dealing with memory loss, but also try to really have people at the grassroots tell a different kind of story of dementia. I always used to say when I was studying over many years that dementia desperately needed a new story. Other diseases got their story, right? Cancer got their story. Close your eyes, you think of cancer, you think of terrible things that happen to your loved ones, but you also think of pink and people together and power. And, HIV and AIDS got a bit of a new story, thank goodness. Even cardiovascular disease got a new story. It got a heart with a pillow, right? People used to drop dead from heart attacks. And I was like, dementia really needs a new story. And I always used to say that it's not going to be the physicians who create the new story. As much as folks love us, they don't want to listen to us all the time anyway. It's going to be the artists who tell new stories, just like they did for many of those diseases, pave new ways of thinking about cancer and AIDS and things like that. And so we just decided to start funding projects. And the impact that I see sort of depends on the project, right? So people who are bringing music and dance and song into assisted living communities and elder communities, they're seeing incredible engagement and a thirst for this kind of work, and it's woefully underfunded, right? People who are creating new stories of dementia are really just trying to tell stories as they experience it. Everybody in the room raised their hand tonight when you asked if they had an experience with Alzheimer's or dementia. That's new. That's what's changed. Everybody is touched by this today. And so, people are just sort of expressing themselves through dance and film and sculpture and crafts and poetry. And we just try to figure out who's got a cool project and try to bring it out and tell something new and work with folks to not adhere to the tragedy narrative, which is a phrase that lots of folks know, right? The tragedy narrative, because it's not all tragedy. Caregiving is done out of love, not out of burnout or burden. So that's sort of how we got started. And then, happy to talk about Miss Mercedes at some point.
Yes. Thanks so much, Dr. Marc. You also acknowledged the ways in which this work is woefully underfunded, which we'll also talk about in a moment. But Liz, I want to jump to you because you're someone who works for an organization that funds doing this work. Sing for Hope. If folks don't know Sing for Hope is the folks who put out pianos in public spaces and paint them and allow people access to music anywhere and everywhere. It's not the only thing that they do, but it's definitely something that they're known for. I'm curious, Liz, as someone who works for an organization that creates real opportunities, what meaning have you made of this work and its impact?
I've been working in what I call creative workforce development for a long time now. I started in an organization in the UK that was working with music and memory and in adult social care, as they call the sector over there. And initially, the kind of drive seemed to be, oh no, we need to spark memory. We need to spark memory. We need to see that awake moment for people living with dementia. And there wasn't enough focus on just the joy of communal experience through music. and also preparing the musicians to work in this area. You know, it's very different being a professional musician going into some of these spaces, as I know Pedro can share some of the experiences I've thrown him into. It's not the same as a creative arts therapist who's had lots of training. The scope of practice is very different. We're not looking for clinical outcomes, but there's still an incredible impact. Music is not a benign intervention. It can cause harm, and you need to be prepared. And a musician needs to be prepared to respond to responses that people might have, and create boundaries for themselves. So I guess what I've learned on this journey, which I really started probably in 2011 in the UK, through to working with this cohort of musicians we have in New York and in DC at the moment, or DMV, is preparing artists to work with people living with dementia or working with challenging health complications is really, really important. And creating pathways for this as a career, like whether it's showing younger people that are pursuing music as a profession that this can be part of your portfolio career, is also really important, especially right now where everyone seems to be like, oh, arts and health, it's great. You know, we get some volunteers and, you know, it's incredibly difficult, as I'm sure all of you know, to be an artist in New York City and to survive. And I would say the one thing in the UK is we were having musicians work in hospitals and healthcare settings, but they all had health insurance because of the National Health Service. And here, you know, I'm placing musicians in hospitals that they can't afford to go in themselves. It's absolutely tragic. And so, yeah, the meaning I'm making is, oh my gosh, we need to advocate so much more for artists, and but also find ways for them to make some money, because valuing music in health as an intervention, recognizing its impact, it deserves to be paid for. You know, I don't want to get into a fight with the pharmaceutical companies, but I'm ready for it. Yeah.
Thank goodness you're ready for it, because we're going to get into barriers and challenges of this work and who are the folks who are kind of stopping us from going further. But thank you so much for sharing, Liz. And, you know, so much of MTF's new programming is about creating economic justice opportunities for our artists and trying to find pathways and ways that they might be able to use their skills that are not in the traditional ways that they understand their work to be, you know, seen in or at. So thank you for being with us and sort of being one of those avenues. I want to turn to Sara for a second, because you've been on the ground with Mercedes. You're an art therapist. And I'm curious about, first of all, just to kind of hear what your experience has been like with the project.
I think first and foremost, it truly has been such an honor, I think, to approach it as a therapist, but also as a community member. And it's been a very raw experience as well, to create a container for people to really just self-express, and to find some sort of avenue to have some control when their world is falling apart and when things are so unknown. So when Flako approached me, it was just sort of like, I would be honored. And, you know, with my own unfortunate, like, personal stuff happening, he was aware. And then my own father got diagnosed with onset dementia. So we're now navigating that. And I think just to really empower others to say it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay also not to know. And coming from a Puerto Rican household, I think that is very essential for people to know that it is okay to ask for support.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I just want to hold space for a moment. Well, I might actually have us move this to Pedro, because Pedro is was one of the artists who started composing original works with MTF on this Modesto project, and then ultimately got roped into this whole world of doing work in hospitals, in elder care facilities. And I'm curious, Pedro, just to hear a little bit about your experience. You've both done this work for the Modesto music tours, but you've also now done the work for Sing for Hope. What has been the experience of going into these communities and working with these folks?
It's been new. Not so new anymore, because I think it's been about 2 years now. But at first, it was very eye-opening. I mean, as a young adult, now going into the mid-30s, it's like, all right, my joints maybe not the same. And then, I'm starting to work with seniors. I'm like, well, I'm headed that way too, It was very humbling and eye-opening. And I guess I went into it with an open mind. I play music at night and at clubs at 2 a.m, and then now I'm playing at 11 a.m for seniors. It was just new, right? But as it continued to develop and the opportunities continued to appear, I continued to also open my mind and realize what I was actually doing. Like, I wasn't treating it just as any other gig anymore. And it's been amazing to see like the benefit, and especially now, like working more specifically with Sing for Hope and the dementia patients. Like, you see the impact when you get a reaction, especially like when something really strikes a nerve, and that's amazing. And I mean, we went for like 3 months to this same place. I played that same song for that guy. It was the same reaction every time, and it made his day. So that just speaks to the importance of this
Which
deep
song
work.
was it, by the way?
El Cantante, Héctor Lavoe, Ruben Blades. He was like, oh, that's my song. I'm like, all right. So I knew to end the presentation with that every time, and it was very impactful. It was very impactful. Also working with seniors without dementia, just the need for the social interaction. They maybe meet with people once a week, in these spaces for an hour or two, and that's it. And then they're like, I think of my grandmother, stuck at home all day, and we got a TV, and so the importance of just basic human connection is very obvious, like when they're engaging with you and with others. So it's an honor to to provide that entertainment.
Okay. We're going to start getting in the dialogue. We'll have about 10 minutes where I'm going to pose a question for us to be in dialogue with Dr. Marc, Sara, Liz. After 10 minutes is when I'll give a little wave, and it's time for anyone who wants to trade spots, ask a question, make a comment, make an observation. You're welcome to join the conversation. Sound okay? Okay.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Ardai Knox, and I am co-executive director of Musical Theater Factory, specifically the director of decolonization and sustainability. And I am coming at you to remind you to subscribe to The Vibe. The Vibe is to get all of the information you could possibly desire about the Musical Theater Factory community. We let you know what our artists are doing in the world. We let you know what they're doing in our home, in our community base, and it has lots of tips and tricks and links to help you further your career, whether you're a director, an actor, a writer, or just an audience member who wants to stay plugged in. If you want to be tapped into all things amazing in New York, especially within NTF, subscribe to The Vibe.
We've already been kind of servicing this question a whole bunch. What opportunities or barriers stand in the way of more theater, storytelling, or music entering places like senior centers, hospitals, care facilities, etc.?
Well, I think coming from a hospital setting, usually the funding is never there to begin with. I think too, in terms of, I work with a creative arts therapy team, a lot of it is advocating and educating and doing so in a way that invites people in versus having someone run for the hills with, clinical language. So it is exciting to see, I think, more interest as we continue to advocate and, hopefully a little more, let's bring music therapists into the setting, more dance therapy, more drama therapy. So fingers crossed with that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm hoping that this conversation too helps us to imagine together what it means to go further than just fingers crossed, because I think that might be the state that we're in. And my curiosity is to be like, what does it mean to move beyond fingers crossed?
I would also say we're in a moment where, at least I feel, this is not the time to wait for funding. It's not the time to ask for permission. It's the time to kind of form strategic partnerships and to collaborate and to just do it. And I want everyone to get paid. But I feel, compared with the funding model in the UK, where philanthropists don't get a tax break like they do here, there is money here. We need to find it. It's not coming from the federal government. But there are incredible philanthropists out there that once they find this work, I think they'll be really into it. But until then, the way we've structured it is really complex co-investment models where we've got lots of partners coming in, including a little bit of government funding, a little bit of DCLA funding, and we're able to package something together where, the older adult center, they are able to pay what they can pay to make it happen. And I think some of that, it's complex and it's an administrative pain, but it's possible.
I think too, in the ways that you all are already doing this, how are we all partnering together or pulling from all these different pools in order to make this happen? I think that theater companies, up until I think COVID time, had been very siloed as institutions. And actually, out of necessity in the pandemic, all of a sudden, we started seeing co-productions happening because there just wasn't enough resources to make things happen. And now we start to think about even beyond co-productions and focusing on the story. So much of what MTF has been leaning into, and so many organizations in the city and beyond, have been focusing on partnerships. What does it mean to be a partner with other theater companies, organizations? But MTF is also thinking, okay, cool, but how does partnership extend beyond just theater companies? How is it extending to sectors that actually where there's a lot in common and there's a lot of things that we can be sharing or teaching each other? This is kind of the first of the conversations or examinings that we're doing here. So I'm just grateful for you kind of laying that out as one way that we've made it possible despite the challenges,
So I'll dive into, something I'm a little more familiar with, which is prescribing. The biggest opportunity out there is to make the arts prescribable. So call it social prescribing. It's a bit shameful that anybody diagnosed with Parkinson's disease is not ordered by their neurologist to go dance. It makes almost no sense as a safe, effective, therapeutic with minimal side effects. There's a lot of examples like that, right? I'm sure you can think of some, but nobody does that. The institutions have a dance thing over here, and they've got a neurology thing over there, and they've got a center for excellence over there, and people don't even know that what's available in underneath their own roofs among the leaders, the big institutions who I look to lead because that's where I came out of and respect. But insurance companies could put forth dollars to this. The prescription could be written. It could be virtual if it has to be. It could be whatever. But you'd have a movement of those things happening. So I think that's the biggest opportunity. And there are people fighting for it, and trying to knock down the walls of, the insurance companies, for example, or proposing projects and starting with research. But it's tough, but I think that's a huge opportunity. I mean, the effect of music on people with memory loss and their caregiver dyads is good. What I love about the arts in things like dementia is you don't need another clinical trial. The research is pretty good. I've been giving medicines for a long time. We give a lot of medicines out that don't have really, really good efficacy in their data. The data's good enough for the arts. So why is it not prescribed? And why is it not paid for the same way the pill is? It's a problem. I think it's a big opportunity.
Yeah. I am a huge advocate of social prescribing, and I've been a part of projects that have been investigating what are the ways to make this more possible. For folks who don't understand social prescribing, you as a physician, Marc, can you take a moment to kind of walk us through the experience of what that would even entail?
I think people intuitively understand what it means. It's not a pill. It's not something that's already been available, like, straight PTOT, all the therapies you can get. It's not a surgical procedure. It's essentially saying that everything we've learned about the social determinants of health and how important, environmental things are and nutritional things are and activity things are, you should prescribe those things. People should get paid to rehabilitate themselves, right? So that's how I think of social prescribing. It's some component of social behavioral things, activity to resources in community, using the community really essentially, and it's all of its aspects, which are something I totally don't understand, to the benefit of the patient.
And I love that so much. I have been social prescribing since the start of the pandemic. And as an art therapist, we are not allowed to prescribe anything, right? And so I can provide psychotherapy, I can provide group and individual. So I wanted to find a way of, okay, how can I take things further at the start of the pandemic? And then I launched a therapeutic online group, and I had caregivers, people diagnosed with acute and chronic illnesses. And this has literally traversed, since the start of the pandemic, where now I launched a group, we're up to almost 200 members, but the decrease in depression and anxiety, it works, right? And so I'm very excited that we get to continue to really advocate for social prescribing, and to the insurance companies, I feel like this is something we need to keep talking about.
Yeah. Let's talk about the players here of social prescribing that make it essential. So first of all, you have an example of like a physician for whom you, Dr. Marc, you yourself are tapped into things that are happening in New York City. And so it's easy enough for you to find someone who is experiencing depression and point them. Is it?
It's harder than you'd think. It's just harder than you think. It's hard to connect people to resources in general. People leave the hospital, they're eligible for canes and walkers and home health services. Do they all get it? Of course they don't. It's hard to get. It's hard to connect with. So, prescribing a voucher to go to a group, they've got to figure out where the groups are. They've got to figure out when they are. They've got to get themselves transported there. They've got, it's not so simple. And even just making all the connections between the medical community, who really does not spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and to figure out which ones they trust or they have a relationship with, is hard.
Yeah. And I think what, Flako created in terms of the healing rooms, where the resources were provided in a packet. And so you have myself, you have social workers, we're developing rapport with families who are literally exiting out of a documentary, and some of them are bawling, right? And so we want to hold space, we want to hold this container, and after we, process what you experience, tell us, what are your barriers? What are some steps we can do here in this moment to support you? Because the work that we do does not end here, right? We want to make sure you are taking everything you need and continuing on. So, that bag of resources was everything.
Yeah. That idea of bringing the resources directly to the community, it's all there for you to take advantage of. I want to, think we've named a few of these players in this larger issue, right? We have the physicians themselves. We have the art therapists that might be attached to an artistic project that's giving out resources to folks. We talked about insurance companies as another player. Can we talk about the barriers?
Well, again, approaching this from an art therapy lens, but a couple of art therapists, we were having a conversation of just like CEU credits, right? Like even just starting with that, like what is acceptable, certain language. Okay, great. Now I'm working in a private practice. You know, what do they find permissible? Okay, if I want a 60-minute session with a family, I really have to document and be careful with my language, right? Otherwise, insurance will give me a kickback, right? And so it is, I think, really figuring out the language too at this point of how can I frame this in a way that says, yes, we might also save you money on your end by supporting people by attending some art therapy, like a 6-week course, right? So
I feel like the argument for it is more clear cut for example, in the UK where I was working for so long, you know, the National Health Service was looking for ways to reduce the burden on the medical sector. So they invested in what they called link workers, which were poorly paid social workers that didn't have the education actually of a social worker, but they were expected to do so much more. They were kind of triaging between the community and the medical sector. And they invested all the money for social prescribing into training link workers that ultimately would connect patients with arts organizations or what they saw was an intervention, could be a gardening club. And they developed this, and it worked really well in some places where they had resources to signpost people to, and not so well in others because so much depended on the link worker. There was absolutely no money for the intervention itself. So there was no funding for the arts organizations, for the artists that were delivering the work. So at the time, you know, our organization was asked to fill out 1 million different websites that could signpost people to opportunities in 1 million different ways. What I'm heartened by the way it seems to be working here, organizations like Art Pharmacy down in Atlanta that's working nationally now, they're trying to get opioid money from the lawsuits to use and actually pay for the arts interventions themselves. And they are training these link workers or referral, they call it something else. They are training them as well. And they're working with specific groups of people. But I see that they are considering the intervention and the artists in their formula. For me, the barrier is the pharmaceutical industry. Like, that's who's going to say why, you know. I've always wondered, how is this going to work in a capitalist healthcare environment? Like, at some point, someone's going to say, well, you can't say that this is better than my pill. It's hard. It's, you know, I hear what you're saying, Mark, about, okay, we've got the studies, but they don't always pass the gold standard, you know, Cochrane review type level, because music in particular is a very complex intervention. Taste accounts for a lot, you know, everything you're bringing to it. So, that's the one to watch. But NJPAC in Newark is doing some incredible work. They got $3 million from Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield to pilot social prescribing in Newark, and they're doing some amazing stuff. So, I'm hopeful.
Yes. Also, I'm going to do this wave here, which means that anyone now can tap in if they'd like to ask a question or name a comment. I was a part of an initiative called Arts for Everybody, which was an 18-city national campaign that was working to bridge the relationship between artists, municipalities, and health workers. And social prescribing was one of the things that they were hoping to encourage by bringing these 3 communities together, was start to understand, can we train community, some of the other language for, you called them what, link workers. Link workers. They were calling them community health workers or community health aides. And they were training artists, as there's a specific case study in Chicago that has done this. They were training artists to become community health workers, who then ultimately became the bridge or the link between the physicians and the resources that were available in communities. And this is the other kind of barrier or obstacle that I see is like, and there's so many different types of roles that I'm sure you all know way better than me. And maybe it's social workers and all of these folks, but there are people whose job it is to understand what's happening in the community in terms of arts programming. These roles, I think, are really critical and crucial, but also arts organizations and programs change like on the daily, especially when we're losing funding for so many of these programs, which then makes it difficult for a physician to always know what's going on in the community from one day to the next. That's something that I also think is a particular challenge that could be interceded potentially by artists.
I mean, I work with a lot of different artists who are working on these types of problems. We work with playwrights, songwriters, improv artists, filmmakers, photographers, musicians, a whole variety. And what I find is that, from my perspective, what I find is that the work is so amazing. And we really, at Dementia Spring, focus on trying to sort of be at the grassroots, like it was alluded to earlier, sort of, meeting them where they are in the community. But what I find is the artists don't know that the artists are working on stuff nearby, because this is a topic that not everybody makes an entire career out of, right? They want to tell a personal story. They want to share something about their lives, their loved ones' lives, a different view of things. They want to pose a question. They want to challenge something. That doesn't mean they're going to work on Alzheimer's disease their entire career. So we've sort of gotten a little savvy about, figuring that out and respecting that. Right? Not everyone is making a career. I'm Marc Rothman, geriatrician, hospice and palliative medicine doctor. Like, that's my career. I'm doing that for 35, 45 years. That's my plan. Like, not every, painter wants to work on Alzheimer's disease for their whole career. So they're coming in and out of the topic a little bit. They're coming in and out of the community. And so trying to help them engage the community as deeply as they're ready to do, but also hopefully try to connect them to other artists who are doing similar work. And I find that's a challenge. They don't know. I mean, I think about the Mercedes experience in BAM. I feel like we could have brought like 5 other artists there if we just sort of kept it open and let them experience it. But how would that have happened? Everyone's trying to get their work done. And that's sort of what I'm noticing, because there's so much work being done now, because everyone's experiencing it and everyone's older adults in their life want to talk about it. And by the way, they all talk about it all the time amongst themselves. And we're sort of a little bit younger, trying to sort of tell stories. And so if we could bring them like the arts, kind of from the ground up and make it safe, like you guys talk about, more of them would go get tested. More of them would go find out what they can do. More of them would go talk to their physicians. More of them would talk amongst their families. Like, that's the whole idea. More of them would be less scared, right? We could take the fear a little bit away from it, and the denial, which is, part of it too. But it's hard because, so many artists are working on it. But they might be an artist 3 blocks away in Manhattan working on it, and you wouldn't know it. So I feel like bringing the artists together to have a communal voice could be really powerful.
Yeah. Which then brings me back to this idea of partnerships and what are the things that we're all kind of galvanizing around? What are the issues? I want to encourage anyone who's not been in the conversation to pop in. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Elliot Valentine. I am a musical theater writer and a current member of the Musical Theater Factory Makers Cohort 4. And I have a question for everyone, so I might move over there afterwards. But both in the development of Mercedes through so many different pre-recorded and live and hybrid forms, and also in working with lots of different kinds of artists, I was wondering if you could all speak a little to different forms of community engagement you see between live arts and pre-recorded arts.
Ooh. I kind of feel like we need to tap Dr. Marc back in here.
So the question was community engagement, different modes. It's hard to do the work with the community. It's not easy, right? Organizations that have gotten into institutions, getting into institutions is hard, right? Like volunteering in institutions is hard. Like my mom wants to volunteer in institutions. It ain't easy. And the same thing is the true with older adults. Like there's privacy concerns, infection control concerns. There's a whole, training concerns, training people for responses, safety. It's hard. But once you form those connections with those communities, those are tight. They last. We're working with folks who are doing some dance in the community, music, singing. Once they are in a community, that's, that could be 10 years. That could be 15 years. Like, it's really, really beautiful what happens. But you kind of got to fight your way in, right? And take time. And you got to be willing to learn, because these are environments that you ain't as familiar with as you think. They have their own rules. They got their own rhythms. And they have a lot of beautiful things happening, but it's stressful. It's a hard environment. And then just doing impact work in the community, like around things like film, it's tough. Like you got to be really organized. At least I think. I'm not the one really doing it. I'm trying to help people do it. You got to be really organized. That's what I see. You have to have a plan. The same way folks have social media plans for their things that they're doing. You got to have a plan. You want to go take your message and get it out there into the aging community to meet people where they are and blah, blah, blah. You have to have a plan. And not everybody has a plan.
This is why I think things like applied theater can be so crucial and so critical, is because these are people who are being trained to have that plan and thinking about, how can I use my artistry as a way to have some real impact out there? And I know, Sada, you're also an artist, so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, but I will say that I know that for Modesto, this idea of pre-recorded versus live, the whole reason why we are exploring tons of different types of media is because our curiosities are about what are all the different ways that this work can find itself in communities all across the country, all across the world. So when you're putting on a VR headset, is because he wants to create a scenario where perhaps you have the gear, but you don't have the person, right? But you can still experience Mercedes' story, right? The difference between a live theatrical piece that tours versus a documentary, which could be put on screens anywhere. This whole reason for the kind of multimedia-ness of this project is because our curiosity is, how can this get up and out in as many places as possible? And part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because we're trying to really unpack what are those obstacles and what are those barriers and what are the opportunities that we have not yet considered, so that we can put this work up and out there to have larger impact on this community.
Yeah, I've been sort of like really taking all of this in, and my identity, it's so eclectic. I'm an art therapist, I'm an artist, right? I'm a daughter, a wife, all of these different things, but they inform my process. And so, you mentioned the word fear earlier, and when I was working in the healing rooms, right, as soon as just someone learning art therapist, right, they drop the art for a moment and there's a bit of fear. A therapist, like, are you going to psychoanalyze me right now in this moment? But then suddenly they hear art. Oh my God, I can't draw. What do I do, right? And so how do I start to develop some rapport in this space to say, whatever experience maybe you've had with a healthcare provider that maybe didn't feel quite as safe, here we can restart again, right? Here I'm going to develop some sort of container that even though we have maybe an hour together, you're going to walk away from this space knowing that there is some community behind you. I think even just as an art therapist, playing around with so many different modalities, right? And witnessing my own journey, I've gone from watercolors to gouache, and right now I'm in the era of short and long form video, right? I never thought I'd experience that, but working with clients who want to express themselves in that way, and it's so extremely cathartic. So
I'm going to hold space in case there's one more comment that wants to be made.
Don't go too far, Dr. Marc. My name's Anya. I'm actually applied theater maker, theater educator, clown, and a part of the producers cohort. And I think I'm curious because I have had these conversations with especially people in the sort of applied theater field, but it's like, how can artists connect, advocate? I feel like sometimes there's a bit of a divide in terms of there's people who are aware of the need for this work, and there's artists who might not even know they want to do the work until they're invited in. And so I'm always curious about how we can connect more and create more advocacy together.
I don't know the answer, but it's just basic awareness. I mean, I came into this field again not knowing that this was even a possibility. And, again, I came in open-minded and I was like, okay,
I kind of see this being, it's been supplemental, but I mean, even like 2 weeks ago, I did pretty much a whole week of work with Sing for Hope. So that, again, started to open my mind to the possibility of this being a long-term career, separate from my, artist brand and what I have published out there in my works. It's just the awareness. If I didn't compose, music, if I didn't get called for what I actually do as a composer, and then for it to be composing for this specific topic, then I would have never fell into this field. So it's just awareness. And trust me, my musician friends want to know about supplemental income. So
a lot of musical theater creators do as well.
Let them know that this work is out there. I don't know what ways there are, but
Well, something I want to acknowledge in that is that, Flako, as an arts leader and artistic director, centered his priorities on wanting to do social justice work in his theater making, which ultimately led to Pedro being invited in to be a composer. And then when I was building a relationship with Liz as an arts leader, recognizing that Liz had opportunities for artists to be going out, and I already knew an artist for whom was doing this work and could now get trained and get paid to do that work, Pedro was the first person who came to mind. So I do think a little bit about our roles as art leaders to be able to center our priorities in these ways that will be impactful for not only the artists to be able to put money in their pocket, but actually to do something meaningful that's going to have real impact on the other end.
Oh my gosh, 100%, right? Because I'm even thinking, when I started, my husband got involved, right? And he's a Latin dance teacher, right? And so he had the opportunity to teach at a senior center, but then it continued as a ripple effect. And then his friend was so excited, another Latin dance teacher, and was like, wait, I want to contribute, right? And so being able to, again, center those priorities, show up, be consistent, right? It shows, right? And everybody then wants to contribute in their own way, be a part, right, of giving back.
National Organization of Arts and Health has been meeting regularly. I'm on their credentialing working group, and they're looking at, particularly for professional artists, finding ways to kind of codify a training program to make it more accessible for social prescribing, not to create barriers around it. And that's the challenging thing. There are people and culture barriers that have been doing this work for decades that, it's not a requirement, but I think it can help if you're trying to get started in this work to understand, the scope of practice. What are some of the core competencies? What kind of training could I get? And right now they're at the very foundational stages of defining some of this stuff. But ultimately, I think we'll find that there might be a more formal pathway into doing some of this work, which might take out some of the guesswork. And then when you are able to say, I've done my arts and health practitioner training, then some of these organizations that are looking at social prescribing are saying, okay, all right. So, we're not replacing creative arts therapists. We're working alongside. There aren't enough artists in the world to deliver this work, so it's not a competition.
Absolutely right. And it really is about empowering. And one thing I always say, right, creative arts therapy, it shouldn't feel like we're gatekeeping, right? We have been creative since the dawn of time, right? And so I think going back to what you mentioned earlier, right, that music can cause harm. Same thing with art, right? If we give the wrong material to somebody who's experiencing psychosis, right, we are going to cause harm, right? So making sure that we have the right amount of training.
Yeah, I would only add in, Anya's question about sort of how do I find opportunities to be involved? How do we not accidentally produce barriers? I'll just tell you a tale. So, we've been giving grants for 5 years. And the first year that we did this after the pandemic, we put out a call for artists, and 19 people applied. And we've discovered a beautiful, beautiful film, Dark Moon, by Katie Matthews. And that short film has now been watched by like 38,000 people on Vimeo. And, so it all was very successful with 19 applicants. I will tell you that the need is so great Every year it has gone up by 25%. This year we received 104 applications. And it's hard to work through those, but we did. And we'll be announcing some new recipients of this year's arts fellowships in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Very exciting. But it just shows the groundswell of artistic energy that is being put into, I like to think of it less about Alzheimer's and dementia. I like to think of it a little bit more about memory. You know, people are grappling with memory. They're grappling with what it means to hold memory and live a life with memory and to lose memories because they're seeing it. Everyone put their hands up earlier this evening. Everyone is seeing it happen in front of their very eyes. We're all watching longevity happen in front of our eyes in a generation or two. And so people are asking questions about how long memories last and what they mean. And I think that's just beautiful. And I think you can explore that in dance. You can explore that in a painting. You can explore that. And that's often how folks find their way in, I think, to sort of thinking about Alzheimer's. It's not that big a leap, right? And I think the trick is you've got to sort of put yourself out there. You got to put your hand up. You got to find a like-minded person working on a project and say, gosh, I'm working on something about memory. I want to tell a new story about what memory is and find out where the heck they're showing their work and who's got a grant out there and what institutions have departments of art and medicine. You know, there are highfalutin academic pathways where you could be brave and just knock on the door and find out what the heck's going on. But you got to reach out and not think that it's an impenetrable system that you can't get through.
Yeah. It's making me think about, I was at a play reading yesterday and the O'Neill was present, which is a developmental theater company for new works. And they were talking about how many applications that they had gotten for new play development. And it was over 1,000 for 6 slots. So when we think about how you've gone from, you've gotten to 100, if more artists understood that they could be looking outside of their sector for opportunities to make meaning and make work, then we might be seeing these works being more present beyond just the theater space, which is why I think this conversation is the thing that we're really hoping to propel artists' awareness around how their skills can be so beneficial even beyond the stage. And I'm just really grateful for you all for participating in this convo and the folks who have stepped up and out to share their questions and comments. I'm going to offer one final collective activity for us to do together. And so in a moment, I'm going to ask everybody to create 4 groups. And I'm going to ask us to fast forward to a future where the integration between art and health is present, active, alive, blossoming. And we're going to give you another chart paper, and you're going to write words and phrases of that vision. What I'm also going to ask is I'm going to ask for an artist scribe who's going to be watching from the outside all the words and phrases that are coming up and turning it into a stanza. Just one stanza of a poem. Fast forwarding to a future where all of this is possible, it's happening, it's alive, and it's breathing. And our 4 artists will each create a stanza. Ready? Go.
We laugh in recognition, in agreement. It's so obvious. What if health, not profit, was prioritized? What if human connection was centered, and our planet, and our families? Our needs are urgent. Can we meet them with urgency?
Effortless, colorful connections actively school each other in the arts. Communities free each other in the past, becoming effortless present. Intergenerations naturally craft wealth and a universal health. Nature is deep, socially prescribed, and deeply witnessed. Fun presents a porous path to multi-hyphenate pasts. Audiences practice safe art.
A circle of paths that branch around care. A forest that artists and patients can share. A natural instinct to let wellness grow. A healing we don't have to remember to know.
To envision a world of global healing, we must remember to embrace our elders and the ways of our ancestors who lived in collective awe of our collective wisdom.
Yeah, I just made magic. Thank you for letting me be a part of the end and like listen to all the beautiful work I just put in. I'm just gathering. Man, Grandma, your work out here. I'm honored to step into a room and just hear that for the last 2 hours. You've been talking about community care and healing and how to continue the work. You making magic out here. Wow.
Thank you all for being a part of such a beautiful evening. This is Fast Forward, our very first one ever, and we're just really excited that you've been along for this ride and for this experiment, and we can't wait to do it again. Thank you so much.
Hey there, it's Ardai Knox, Co-Executive Director of Musical Theater Factory, specifically Director of Decolonization and Sustainability, and I am here to remind you that if anyone's got us, we got us. In this time of chaos and insanity, invest in the community that is investing in you. Invest in the We Got Us Fund, a new initiative by MTF to make sure that every single member of our community is not getting paid just a living wage, is not getting paid in exposure, is not getting paid in promises, but it's getting paid a thriving wage. Yeah, you heard me, a thriving wage. Help us ensure that that everyone in your community, everyone in our community is able to not just live, but thrive. Invest in the We Got Us Fund today.
Hey everyone, I'm Fallon, and thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Fast Forward. I am on the MTF staff as the Coordinator of Connectivity and Systems. And if you want to stay tuned in, please like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss future episodes, upcoming releases, and live tapings. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.